if you have any questions that you'd like to ask throughout, then please put them in the chat box and we'll come to them all at the end in the Q&A. So to start off, we'll have Asma Taufik from the Clean Cooking Alliance to give us some opening remarks for this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen, and a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, a very warm today's webinar, Beyond Households, Modern Energy for Institutional Settings. Today is also the first and engage everyone across the clean cooking. And CCA is extremely pleased to partner with MECS on this. This year, we're also celebrating the 10 years of impact for the Clean Cooking Alliance. Since the Clean Cooking Alliance was founded in 2010, more than 400 million people have gained access to technology, with more than 4.6 lives saved from harmful health impacts attributed to household air pollution. However, while the pace of access has more than doubled over the past decade, progress remains far too slow, and hence we continue to call on governments, donors, financial institutions, private sector and civil society to prioritize clean cooking and take bold action to ensure we achieve our climate and development goals, leaving no one. As we know, the world is not on track to meet the SDG 7.1 of universal access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy by 2030. In 2019, only about 60% of the global population had access to clean, comprising electric cooking, LPG, natural gas, biogas, solar, and alcohol. Today's session on modern energy cooking transitions in institutional settings such as schools, health centers, prisons, community centers, and religious settings in both development and humanitarian contexts in the global south is an extremely crucial. While solutions exist, no one solution fits all, and we have to understand the different contexts and situations, and most importantly, user needs and comfort. Smart and equitable subsidies will play a critical role in expanding clean access to last-mile households, including those in institutional and humanitarian settings. In our goal of ensuring leaving no one behind, it is important to understand and address the gaps of lack of clean cooking solutions in institutional and humanitarian settings. We have to be innovative and impactful while working in these settings, whether it is about the solution, financing, delivery mechanisms, or governance. It is important to identify what works in these special situations and whether traditional market approach is suitable to solve the problem or not. We have to take bold actions and share best practices. I'm really excited about today's session and look forward to the and learn more about the work that has been done in this. Without further delay, I would like to hand it over back to Kristen to start us off. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asma. It's really great to hear your perspective and insight on all those points. I'm going to provide a bit of an introduction to today's webinar. So let me just share my screen and then we can get going. I hope that that's visible to everyone. So to introduce myself, my name is Kirsten Campbell. I'm a research associate on the Modern Energy Cooking Services project, where I'm the lead for research into modern energy cooking in institutional settings. I work closely in this with my colleagues Ivona Bisaga and Long Seng To, who you'll meet later in this session. So I'd like to welcome you again to our webinar. Thank you to everyone for coming and to our presenters and panelists for joining. We're really excited to be running this on what seems like a quite under-discussed aspect of cooking and energy, and hopefully there will be many future discussions following this. So to start with, I'm going to provide a brief introduction to the MECS program and give some background and context to the institutional cooking issues that we're discussing here. I'll then give an introduction to the speakers that we have today. So the Modern Energy Cooking Services MECS program is a 5-year program funded by UK Aid and the FCDO, which started in October 2018. The goal of this program is to spark a revolution to rapidly accelerate the transition from biomass to genuinely clean cooking, such as electricity, gas, and gas on a global scale. We do so through research, partnerships, supporting innovation and scaling up and leaving no one behind. We aim to understand progress in the transitions to modern energy cooking services and to take advantage of new technological developments, relative price movements, and new knowledge. And we try to generate knowledge on how to scale the transitions and transformations, putting these into practice in collaboration with partners. Another focus is on strengthening the monitoring of global progress in order to influence policy and environment. The program's intended outcome is to have a range of market-ready innovations through technical and business models, which lead to an increased uptake in affordable, reliable, and sustainable modern energy cooking services for users. MECS is implementing a strategy focused on including the cooking needs of households and institutions into the investment and action of SDG 7, access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable modern energy for all, and for participating countries to incorporate modern energy cooking services in energy policies and planning. And within MECS, the institutional cooking workstream was added in early 2020 alongside the humanitarian workstream to expand MECS's learnings into what are often somewhat overlooked areas of energy and cooking conversations. To provide a wee bit of background into what we mean by institutional cooking, this is where we refer to any cooking that takes place on a scale larger than is usually seen in domestic settings. So, for instance, school cooking, in healthcare settings, in institutions such as prisons, canteens, or barracks, in cultural settings such as religious centres, and humanitarian institutions like reception centres and emergency response units. And in these settings, cooking can take place for anywhere between tens to thousands of people all at once, facilitating not just the delivery of food, but also supporting educational, welfare, and release programs, often with distinct social, cultural, and political meanings. Attempts to address the challenges associated with institutional cooking have included the development of improved institutional cook stoves, large-scale solar cookers, particularly in some South Asian contexts, as well as large-scale biogas programs, and more recently, the rollout of LPG to public institutions in some contexts. However, by and large, institutional cooking in much of the world is heavily dependent on unclean biomass, without large-scale uptake of these alternative means. Options for electric cooking are emerging, but require greater development and uptake to have impact on scale. And both the implications of the use of biomass in institutional settings and the ways to address these concerns are somewhat under-researched. However, we do know that the use of biomass in institutional cooking can contribute to air pollution and associated health risks for those working in and studying, living, or being treated near institutional kitchens, as well as environmental degradation and resource scarcity, potential black carbon emissions, and in many places, a very high cost burden on social institutions and their staff, students, and surrounding communities. And institutional cooking, as I've said, has largely been left out of wider discussions on energy access in institutions, such as schools and healthcare settings, which we argue should be readdressed. And while there have been efforts to address, to some extent, energy transitions in institutions, these have largely had less fanfare than in domestic settings, which, having received less attention from policymakers and practitioners, having been less researched and received far less funding. And so there are many learnings which can be derived from existing research and progress into modern energy and domestic cooking, including some of the technologies, delivery models, and supply chains. Likewise, many of the actors supplying modern energy in domestic settings could also have the potential to make significant impact in institutional settings. There are also overlaps with cooking in commercial settings, for instance. However, there are some key distinctions beyond simply the scale at which resources are used in institutions. We should hear about more of them during today's webinar. For instance, many institutions have considerably less flexibility on the time and means by which meals can be cooked. A technical breakdown, issues with a supply chain, or a power outage could have a severe impact for institutions feeding hundreds of people. This risk aversion means that our efforts to address energy transitions in these settings needs to pay attention to the wider systems in place to ensure resilient and effective cooking solutions. Cooking in institutions requires engagement across a wide range of interconnected stakeholders, and financial models need to work within often under-resourced public and community institutions, which requires specific adaptation for local contexts. However, the potential impact for working on institutional cooking is huge. in providing cleaner and safer kitchens, but also in instigating change on a wider scale, opening up new markets and being integrated within national and international policymaking, and particularly in terms of integrating approaches to clean cooking and electricity access and public institutional processes. Beyond addressing the issues associated with unclean cooking and with energy access more widely, cooking and food provision that takes place in institutions is important within wider cultural development and humanitarian discourses. The role of cooking and meal provision in these settings often contributes to wider institutional goals. These include improved nutrition, attendance and attainment aims of school feeding programs, food as part of cultural and religious rituals, community meal provision, providing food security in humanitarian contexts, and providing an accessible and affordable meal for workers. Contextual factors shape what food is cooked, how meals are prepared, and the expectations from those eating, and it's therefore essential to consider institutional cooking within these systems as opposed to as discrete, universalized, and technical solutions. What we're currently doing in MECS is that we're supporting and undertaking our own research into what modern energy cooking in institutions can and should look like in different settings and contexts in the world. We're currently undertaking baseline studies into institutional cooking in displacement and non-displacement settings in the ASEAN region and in Zambia, as well as supporting the pilot of e-cooking within institutions in numerous contexts as undertaken by our partners, some of whom will be presenting today. We've been working to assess, test, and promote effective technological options for modern energy in institutional cooking, as well as trying to understand what finance and scale-up models might be effective for energy delivery. We're keen to embed an awareness of institutional cooking within policymaking agendas at multiple levels, and where institutional cooking interacts with grid extension plans and other energy access approaches, as well as opportunities to improve resilience and food and energy security. In today's webinar, our aim is to galvanize and hopefully widen the discussion on institutional cooking and to consider the opportunities and limitations in facilitating sustainable and safe energy transitions in these spaces. We're particularly keen to identify the gaps that our presenters and panelists see in their understandings of institutional cooking and the needs that they identify for technical, financial, governance, and supply chain innovation. With this in mind, we invite the participation of our audience, not only during this session, but also to reach out after this session to engage on these topics with MECS. While we have a wide range of expertise and perspectives represented here, we're keen to broaden this engagement with those involved in governance of both energy and of institutions, those working on grassroots level involved in community institutions, and particularly those working on energy access projects in institutions who perhaps haven't meaningfully engaged with the role of cooking in these projects. And we hope that this webinar will be the first of many on this topic, so we welcome any suggestions and communications from anyone interested. We have three presentations today. Firstly, we'll hear from Rafa at the World Food Programme, who'll be talking about the role of energy within WFP operations and the linkages between energy access and food security, with the school cooking undertaken by WFP having particularly relevance in institutional cooking. Secondly, we have Caroline from SNB speaking about their work in the Kakuma refugee camp on cooking in social institutions and how they've been thinking about the needs, opportunities, and gaps in energy provision. And then finally, Katharina and Anna will be speaking about Tatedo's experiences of testing large-scale electric cookers as a possible proof of concept for electric cooking technologies to be used in certain institutional settings. And they reflect on some of the more practical consideration of these in cooking the dishes that they tested. And we're going to follow these discussions, these presentations with a panel Q&A discussion. Our presenters will be joined by Mark Gibson from the GPA Global Platform for Action on Sustainable Energy in Displacement Settings, and Long Seng To, lecturer at Loughborough University and Engineering for Development Fellow, who works on energy access and community resilience. For this, we invite you to put any questions for our discussion in the chat box below, and Ivona, who will be moderating that discussion, will pick that up. So, on that note, I'd like to hand over to Rafa to present. And if you'd like to share your screen and go ahead with your presentation whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Sorry about this. I thought we were going to manage the slides, but Here we go. All right, can you hear me fine?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
So I wanted to link the work of WFP, so food assistance, with the importance of cooking. WFP is the largest humanitarian organization dealing with food. We deliver food in emergencies that might be caused by conflict, climate, or other things on one side. And on the other side, we also work for development in the development context. And therefore, yeah, the food work is quite extensive. We are about 20,000 people around the world and have a presence in 83 countries. The two programs that I wanted to mention today are the emergency one. So we are a first responder to emergencies. In 2020, we were tackling 17 emergencies and reaching out to over 100 million people. On the other front, the program that is most relevant today is the school feeding program. WFP has been working with schools for 6 decades, 100 countries, setting up school feeding programs that are gradually then given to the governments to take over. And in 2020, we reached 15 million children for a cost of about $0.28 per child per day. Now, most of the food that is provided by WFP needs cooking. And that's the main reason why cooking is so important to us. The problem is that the fuel is scarce, and therefore we need to think about the cooking that normally is externalized to the beneficiaries. But lack of fuel leads to lots of issues, bartering the food ration for fuel, undercooking or skipping meals. In schools, the fuel is often the responsibility of parents and children. So not being able to either pay for the fuel or collect the fuel to bring it to school might even affect attendance and is leading to the schools not being able to cook, for example, when there isn't enough fuel. We did calculate what it would cost to, in addition to the cost of each meal, to make sure that that meal is cooked in the school feeding programs, and that's $0.02 per child per meal. In 2020, so we have a quite good footprint in addressing cooking issues. Since we started recording the work with the cooking, improved cooking, since 2003, and have been working with 47 countries, reaching 20,000 schools with stoves. However, the work we have done so far is patchy, is not organized globally, and definitely we need to look at how to address this problem in a more comprehensive way. examples of the work we are doing. For example, in Lesotho, we are going to test electric pressure cookers, and the picture actually, the photo actually is kindly stolen from Tatedo, I believe. We are only procuring the electric pressure cookers right now, so I thought it was better this picture than an invoice. We have been trialing model cooking in other emergency settings, such as Bangladesh and Malawi, but with households. The approach we aim to use is market-based, meaning that we would rather have the private sector to deliver the solutions instead of being WFP procuring and distributing those solutions because of the sustainability in the long term. Wherever possible, we would favor modern energy cooking services. So working with gas in all its forms, electricity and liquid fuels. And we are looking at carbon finance as one way to contribute to the cost of shifting toward modern energy solutions. Modern energy solutions are actually already viable in some of the contexts where WFP is present. So, for example, in Venezuela, we are looking at refurbishing schools and the gas cooking that was present and has been disrupted in recent years. In Armenia, our schools are cooking with electricity, but we would like to use more efficient electric cooking, such as electric pressure cookers, to increase efficiency. Other important considerations are around the fact that programs are often centered around the delivery of stoves. But that's not a integral way of looking at programs. So fuel needs to be part of the consideration, and fuel over the long term. So fuel supply over the long term, and we need to think about sustainably harvested fuel as well, if biomass is still the solution to be adopted. Getting a school to clean or modern cooking needs to be permanent, needs to be a lasting solution. So we really need to shift our approach toward this different way of thinking, how to get one school at a time into modern cooking for good. And surely subsidies should be part of the picture to fund not only the clean cooking, but all the co-benefits that do come with it. So WFP's ambition is to support the beneficiaries accessing clean and modern cooking solutions, moving away from traditional cooking methods. And we can leverage our extensive field presence in humanitarian settings and given our presence in the school feeding programs. And we look forward to partner up with governments and other organizations that share this vision with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rafa. Those were great perspectives, and we look forward to hearing more from you during our panel discussion later. So next we have Caroline from SNE, who will be speaking about into place settings with reference to
Hi, yes, I think you just introduced me. There was some background noise. Let me quickly share my screen. It's loading now. Yes, it's visible.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, thank you, Kirsten, for the introductions. So my name is Carlijn Groen. I work for SNV Kenya as a project advisor. SNV is an international development organization working in people's. I'm hearing some background. Working towards improving people's livelihoods and access to basic services in agriculture, energy, and the wash sector. I work for the Kenyan country offices on the energy department, in which we mostly work to develop energy markets. I, in specific, support the implementation of the program, on which we also work on social institutions. Hence, I was asked to present an overview of the state of institutional cooking in Kakuma refugee camp. Yeah, so this is the Energizing Development Program in Kenya. It consists of two components, of which one is the market-based energy access project. Here we promote the solar access to solar and cook stove through a market-based approach, targeting households, micro businesses, but also social institutions. And we do so by supporting companies that sell solar and cook stove solutions to enter the market in Kakuma and develop their business, also introduce new type of products, providing other services. So Kakuma refugee camp, and which consists of, well, it consists since the 1990s, and it was recently, a few years ago, expanded to also include Calabria integrated settlement, as the capacity was too much. The current population is about 200,000 refugees and about 60,000 host community members. So within our project, we also try to reach the host communities, as Turkana is very remote. Only Kakuma town has access to the national grid, but both the camp and the settlement do not have access to the national grid. Only in Calabria integrated settlement, there is now a solar mini grid. So people primarily cook using biomass, so both open fires and basic biomass stoves. So now I will present to you kind of a snapshot of what is happening in the social institutions in Kakuma. So there are approximately 60 institutions in Kakuma town, Kakuma refugee camp, and Calabria integrated settlement that provide services to the population. So these include schools that have a size up to 250 to 5,500 children per institution, so not in total. This is also hospitals and clinics, special service centers such as protection centers, and also reception centers for new arrivals. And as you can see on the type and the size of the institutions, they all have very different cooking needs. Also, as Rafaela actually also mentioned, depending on feeding programs they receive. So for instance, all the primary schools in Kakuma, they receive food distributions. Hence, they prepare a school meal for school children every day, while the secondary schools do not. And so they only actually have to do cooking for their staff. So on the right, you see already a picture of stoves that are used commonly in the institutions. These are all firewood stoves. And these are all actually, well, most commonly funded by several donor agencies. And these are really varying in size. So some are small for 50 liters, but they also go up to 500 liters. And many of the institutions have several stoves they cook on. Well, as again, a stove also needs fuel. So UNHCR actually provides cooking firewood to all these institutions at no cost. Well, for them it costs money, but the schools get it for free. And so this is actually estimated at about 1,250 metric tons per year. So these are massive amounts of firewood. And now I just want to give you some examples of what cooking looks like in the different institutions. So yeah, on the right, you see a primary school in Calabier. So every day, a lunch is prepared by 4 cooks for 2,400 school children on these stoves, while the school staff actually prepares meals on open fires outside. This is the next slide. You see on the left a hospital in Calabier, where 3 meals for 20 patients are cooked. But of course, the difference in a hospital is that people stay overnight, so they need to prepare 3 meals a day. On the right, you see a boarding secondary school in Kakuma. Because it's boarding, they actually also provide all the meals. So this is 7 days a week, 3 times a day, and is for 350 school children. And actually in this institution, you see below, the school staff actually prepares the meals outside on either charcoal or biomass stoves or on open fires. And then another 2 cases, which unfortunately are also quite common in Kakuma. So oh, sorry, just had a question. I guess we get back to that later. On the right, on the left, you see a primary school in Kakuma. They actually have 2 large stoves, but both are actually in such poor condition that the lunch is prepared on these open fires, which are, of course, well, less efficient than improved institutional stoves. And on the right, you see another stoves being lit in a primary school. And you see that when they're lit on the bottom, the chimney is actually broken. So there are a lot of smoke is released. Hence, actually, the cooks, they have to cook in these closed sheds, usually with a lot of smoke, while the temperatures in Kakuma can go up to, well, an average of 35 degrees. So you can imagine the circumstances and the implications for their health. So when we were, because within the MBEA project, we've done the MBEA projects in 2017, and only from 2020 on, we've been also focusing on social institutions. So to inform basically, our activities, we did an assessment on the cooking situations of 53 social institutions in Kakuma. And here we also actually found that even though most of the schools, they have these large institutional stoves, most of them are in very poor state, usually due to a lack of maintenance. So almost all the chimneys require replacement because they're not cleaned, or they just had an issue, but there was no contractor that was used to actually fix it. And this usually causes excessive smoke and low stove efficiency as well. Then you also find that, the stove structures itself are of poor condition. So poor in the bodies, the stove pot doesn't always fit right well, which means you again lose efficiency. There's sometimes a lack of a door, a firewood grate. All these also lead to fuel wastage and a long cooking time. So within the project, we have been exploring, potential solutions. And we first wanted to understand, what is the impact of doing repairs. So we did a controlled cooking test recently with 7 stoves in 7 separate institutions to understand what difference does a repair make for fuel savings and cooking time. And of course, we also looked at the smoke emissions. So we found that, depending, of course, so what we did is that we looked at the performance of a stove before repair and then after repair services were done. And so depending, of course, on the state of the pre-repair stove, the performance changed. But we found that an average of 25% of firewood can be saved, can be achieved with the repairs. And for cooking time, it was 28%. But there was quite a wide range as well. So these are the averages. But that was just for cooking one rice meal of 40 kg. And that's usually institutions, they cook, for instance, 80 kg of rice every day. So you can imagine in a year what type of difference that can make in terms of time and fuel. In addition, because we basically had to replace all the chimneys in these 7 stoves, there was also a significant reduction of smoke exposure, even though not quantifiably measured. And so this really shows that stove installations need to be accompanied with proper O&M services and also end user training on how to use the stove and also how to maintain it to increase durability, fuel and time efficiency. So looking at solutions, so one of the things, of course, that you can be doing is doing repairs with a proper O&M plan, operation and maintenance plan, and user training to reduce the use of firewood, cooking time, and negative health impacts. What we also have been doing for the last year is to support. So within the MBA program, we have now about 10 companies actively selling in Kakuma either solar and or stove products. These are mostly targeted at households and small businesses, eateries within stoves. But so we have 3 companies that are selling stoves. But one company actually also sells institutional stoves. And they have actually been doing a number of new stove installations or replacements. And so we have actually been helping them with making the connections to the institutions, helping them do some marketing. And they actually has resulted in several sales to institutions. And so this also shows how private sector engagement can really be a solution in terms of addressing institutional cooking. As you can see on the right, for instance, on the top picture, it was the previous stoves that this hospital was using. And on the picture below is what the company that we supported has provided now, with also a proper warranty in place and O&M services. And so also actually what Raffaella mentioned, private sector engagement can be key in terms of providing improved cooking solutions. Also together with the MECS program, we are now exploring what could be the potential for electric cooking. So most of the institutions in Kakuma will in the near future be electrified by solar systems, standalone solar systems. And so this would also actually provide opportunity to explore electric cooking. So for instance, large electric pressure cookers could be a solution to partially at least complement the training and meet the use of firewood stoves. So these are some of the solutions that we are exploring and actually also actively pursuing. But as you can see, within displacement setting, institutional cooking has many challenges, but in that sense also many opportunities. And we look very much forward to explore all of this with all the players in the clean energy sector. So thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Caroline. That was really interesting and really great to hear a perspective from a humanitarian context as well. And the work that we're hopefully going to collaborate on around e-cooking should be really, really exciting. So next we have a pre-recorded presentation from Katerina and Anna. Katerina is at Tatedo and Anna works in Gamos as part of MECS. So Joni, are you good to go on that? Great.
Hi everyone, welcome to this presentation about the Tanzanian experience cooking on one of the institutional-sized EPCs. My name is Anna and I work for Gamos with the MECS program, and I'm co-presenting today with Katerina from Tatedo, a long-standing partner in eCook and MECS work in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. And we're very much looking forward to telling you about our investigations so far in terms of how compatible the large EPC could be for the institutional context in Tanzania. So our main research question is, are large EPCs viable for institutions in Tanzania? And this small empirical trial is a first step towards trying to answer this question, being the first time a large EPC has been tried by Tanzanian cooks. So the sub-questions we were interested in answering for this trial are: what common dishes are possible to cook in the large EPC? What is the usability like? What are the ergonomic considerations of using it? And what other insights might we gain which are related to the Tanzanian cooking context? So a large EPC arrived in Dar es Salaam to the Tatedo office, and it was great to have 2 expert EPC cooks be able to try it. Katerina and her colleague Anande are very familiar with the household size EPCs and frequently conduct training around Tanzania and how to use them. So they are extremely well placed to trial this EPC and comment on its usability and suitability for Tanzanian cuisine. So the EPC on trial was a 40-litre model manufactured by a factory in China. It draws approximately 4 kilowatts and just under 20 amps when it's operating. So what did the trial consist of? Katerina and Anande cooked 6 common Tanzanian dishes on the EPC. These are rice, beef stew, kande, yellow bean stew, ndizi, banana stew, and ugali. They also did some standard water boiling tests. For each dish, they measured the time and energy use, and these can be found in the report on the MECS website. Also for each dish, they noted the usability aspects, how convenient it was, or any difficulties. And through their in-depth experience of the cooking culture in Tanzania, this led to being able to make qualitative comparisons with cooking on biomass stoves, both improved and traditional. They were looking for if it was easy to cook, convenient, and really just to gain insight into the experience of a cook using a large EPC. So I will now hand over to Katerina, who will present the experience of cooking a couple of these dishes and then summarize the insights about usability, safety, and convenience.
Thank you very much, Anna, for the great introduction. Let me start with the traditional famous food called kande. Kande is a mixture of pounded maize and beans, which is regularly cooked in schools. From the test we performed, we observed that it takes only 3 hours to prepare on large EPC, compared to 3 to 5 hours cooking on improved biomass and more than 5 hours on traditional biomass stoves. It is very convenient and there is no need for supervision while cooking. It is affordable, as you can see, and the food was very delicious. Let's also see another food called ndizi. This is just unripened bananas boiled with beef. Sometimes we use chicken instead of beef. It depends on the preference of people you are cooking for. Banana stew is very easy and fast to prepare, although peeling bananas on preparing large portions is tiresome. It is not a common dish in schools, but much preferable by many people, and it is a popular dish with the caterers and large restaurants. It is very economical in terms of energy consumption, especially on using EPCs. Another food is ugali, the so-called stiff porridge. This is most common type of food in Tanzania and a daily dish to most schools here. It is very easy to prepare on 6 liters EPC, as you only need to hold the EPCs in a pot with one hand and stir with the other. With 40 liters EPC, it wasn't easy, so we both had to stir since the portion of garlic cooked was very large. Actually, it was sufficient for 70 people. As you can see in this video, stirring without holding the pot causes a lot of movements, spinning and knocking of the pot around the housing. So if this is something happening repeatedly, assuming ugali is being cooked every day, we do think that it can damage the appliance in very short period. But the resulting ugali tested as normal as the one cooked in other stores. So more trials are required on how best stirring can be done And we still believe different tests can be undertaken to explore more options that will eliminate the challenges we encountered on our first trials. And this is a table summarizing the results of all tests we undertaken. As we can see, the time taken, electricity consumed, and related cost for a particular amount of each food tested indicated here. Usability and suggestions for improvement. From experience while testing the 40 liters EPCs, with an insulated lid was really a challenge. The lid gets very hot, so the cook need to be extra careful as can easily get burned. About placement in the kitchen, it may require designing a table that is a bit lower than a normal height kitchen table or countertops, because if put on such heights, it will be very high for users to operate it, and on placing it on the floor, it will require them to bend. So this is not ergonomically safe. About capacity, we observed that the EPC we received was labeled 40 liters, while on measuring was a bit lower, the 28 liters to the maximum level and 32 liters to the top. As we all know that in schools, they cook large portions of food, so this loss volume might be very important to them. Conclude, from this empirical study, large EPCs certainly have very high potential as a clean cooking solution for Tanzanian institutions. This is because 5 out of 6 common food tried were fast, easy and convenient on large EPCs, except with the ugali that need more research as stated earlier. Field trials in schools around Dar es Salaam is our next step in order to answer this question that are large EPC viable for institutions in Tanzania? So get in touch with opportunities for collaboration. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much to Anna and Katerina for preparing this presentation. And here we conclude the 3 presentations that we had planned for today's webinar. And I would like to open up the floor to more questions. Thank you so much to everyone who's already been posting them in the chat. They're all well noted, and we're going to start going through them right now. So feel free to either raise your hand if you want to speak out, or otherwise post your question in the chat and we'll get to it. So without further ado, if I could ask the presenters to come on video if possible. And also I would like to invite Long Seng-to from MECS and Loughborough University and Mark Gibson from the Global Platform for Action to join us on this panel. I can see that I think we've got Katerina among the attendees. Katerina, if you are with us, no need to come on video if that might be challenging given the connection, but we might have some questions for you in the course of the Q&A. I saw that she was with us earlier, but let's see. Oh, there she is. So yeah, we had some questions for Caroline and for Rafa already. So perhaps we'll start with you, Caroline. Really interesting to see all the work that SNV are doing in Turkana and in Kakuma more specifically. And there was a there was a question about the Turkana wind farm and access to electricity in the camp, and whether that could at any point benefit access in the settlement. So maybe your take on that question, and also one on non-carbonized briquettes instead of firewood for energy saving stoves in Kakuma. And I realize that this is not necessarily an SNV specific question, so perhaps if you could share your view, and then maybe also Rafa, given that WFP are heavily involved in the kind of food provision and cooking side of things in the schools in Kakuma. So over to you, Caroline.
Yeah, thanks, Ilona. Thanks so much. And also thanks for the question. Starting with the Turkana wind farm. So indeed, I think it was also mentioned in the chat, Turkana is a very, very large county, and the wind farm actually, the power generated goes directly to the national grid at the moment, which actually Kakuma, the camp, is not connected to. And it is as far that, I don't see it directly powering the camp, unfortunately, but at least it shows that Turkana has a big potential for wind electricity. So in that sense, that would be, of course, really great in terms of providing energy access. On the non-briquettes question, that's indeed something that we've been exploring primarily with our private sector companies. So basically, the way also MBEA works and SMV is that we believe, or we work towards private sector delivery from a long-term sustainability perspective, and so we have indeed had these conversations with our companies. To what extent can they provide, briquettes to use in these institutions? And we are still having those conversations, as this is indeed would be a very good solution, at least as an alternative for firewood. I think also briquettes could be very good solution to serve to households and also the eateries. The thing is with briquettes, though, it needs to be, of course, made from feedstock, so materials. And Kakuma in Turkana County, it has kind of a lack of these raw materials that you can easily make briquettes from. There's not much of agriculture happening because of the dry land, and so therefore looking at waste products, this needs to be sourced from more the urban settings, more densely populated areas. And so there you go into the cost of logistics to ship these fuel to Kakuma, and so that's where the considerations are currently are. And then another component of it is also the compatibility of the stoves to the current stoves to be run or fueled by these briquettes. So there's a lot of still uncertainties there that needs to be explored, but it could certainly be a very good solution, and ideally provided by a company from a long-term sustainability perspective. So I'll leave it there, and I'm also curious to hear indeed Rafaela's opinion on this.
Great, thank you, Caroline. Yeah, over to you, Rafa, please.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree with Caroline. So, briquettes or pellets are a wonderful opportunity when it is feasible. The feedstock is super important because we always need to sit down and do a little bit of calculation over the availability of pellets and briquettes, because as Caroline was saying, the stoves are different. And so we need to be sure that there is enough supply for the need. So we need to carefully calculate the need, the supply, and see with institutions, it is a bit easier because we tend to know more precisely the needs and also the logistic. So we can expect a certain demand and just deliver to each end users that would use lots of it. So it's a little bit easier, but still quite challenging. So definitely good when possible.
Yeah, if only it was always possible, right? And the opportunities sort of were more than the challenges. But I like what Caroline said earlier in her presentation, that while there might be many challenges, that means there are also a lot of opportunities. So it's great to see that that kind of exploration of alternatives is actually taking place, and we're not just continuing necessarily with business as usual, you know, for the long term. Rafa, while we've got you, I wanted to bring up the question that was posted in the chat on market-based approaches and the subsidy elements that are required. And that also includes the component of sort of delivery models and the, I guess, financing mechanisms that might be used under schemes such as PAYCO, for example, for the end users. So if you could comment briefly on that, how that is operationalized within WFP, that would be great. And then I will pick on Mark's opinion as well. So please, over to you again.
Thank you, Ivona. So first of all, it's work in progress, right? So we come from a situation where WFP selects the solutions, procures, and distributes. So this is the baseline. What we are aspiring to do and trying to do in some contexts is to get the private sector to supply. So market-based solution actually for us means also that it is the private sector that is supplying the solution rather than us, you know, carrying it on our shoulders and getting technology to enter the country waived without taxes and things like that. Why? Because those are the challenges that need to be addressed somehow. So the most challenging work is to address those problems and then build a system that can continue after we move out. Each context is different. So in many places, you know, the government should pay for the cooking solutions as it does in the developed world, if you may. But where that's not possible, then we can we basically pay for the stores. In some other contexts, like Armenia, where the schools are already paying for electricity, so the government is already paying for electricity, introducing EPCs might really be done with a program that addresses the upfront capital more than anything else. So a payment system that is, you know, with installments and things like that. So we might not need to give, after a small pilot, we might not need to give any subsidies whatsoever. So each case is slightly different.
Great, thank you, Rafa. Yeah, that's you know, some really important sort of points in there, how complex it actually is and how many different stakeholders and sort of governance systems you have to operate under in order to create that change. So thank you for sharing that from the WFP's perspective. Mark, coming to you, sort of thinking specifically about displacement settings, and of course WFP work across different settings, including that. But here specifically from kind of GPA's point of view, you know, on the market-based approaches and the, you know, the work that is ongoing on financing schemes for access to clean and modern energy cooking in those settings. If you could comment a little bit on that and sort of position institutional cooking within that landscape. I know it's a lot to ask for, but we're good on time, so please take it away.
No, great. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me for today's presentations and panel discussion. Yeah, market-based solutions are a really sort of key part of the work that we're doing within the Global Platform for Action. And really this is because we see a sort of funding gap where traditional donors are not really, don't have the financial clout to really sort of invest and deliver cooking solutions across the board. You know, they are strapped for money themselves. So how do we sort of address that sort of funding gap? And that really comes from the sort of market-based approaches, and as Rafa mentioned, bringing in the private sector. And what we would like to see, and what, as you hinted at, what we're working on is some blended finance solutions where we can draw down on, say, grant funding or donor money to actually unlock barriers to markets, or incentivizing potential markets where private sector capital can come in, and actually we can develop a market around, say, cooking in a displacement setting. And this really is, you know, quite a challenge. And I think two of the main reasons really is around the sort of perception around the sort of long-term, the longevity of a displacement settings. All the language we hear about refugees and migrants is this time next year they'll be gone. It's very sort of temporary conversation, whereas experience tells us they could, you know, potentially be in existence for over 20 years. So there is a market there. We just need to change the narrative, which can be quite challenging in some country contexts, and the way that refugees and migrants are used in the political sphere. And the second one really is about cash availability. We always assume that a lot of displacement settings are, you know, poorest of the poor, and don't get me wrong, there are. But there's also situations and contexts where there is money available and displaced communities are already paying for fuels, be it traditional fuels around firewood, that allows them to get on with other activities. And the research that's been done to date shows that some fuels, say LPG for instance, where the actual replacement of a cylinder is actually far cheaper than actually buying traditional charcoal. The problem we actually face is that households cannot buy in to that marketplace. So again, a blended finance solution where we have the stove and first cylinder given away can actually then perpetuate this market-based solution. And this really is where we see the opportunity for institutional cooking. It has been a sort of, I would say, an ignored topic in displacement settings because the focus really is on households and delivering, you know, the biggest need of energy is cooking. But I think there's a great opportunity here to not use institutionals as a test bed for cooking, but to actually promote modern clean energy cooking in these settings that allows the local community to see the benefits of these new approaches. And we have to also be aware that, you know, there's no silver bullet for cooking, right? So we need to look at different fuels. And I think, again, the institutions offer an opportunity to show us how fuel stacking could potentially work in a certain cultural context around that. So, yeah, I see a lot of benefits to working around market-based approaches in displacement settings at institutional levels that can help support what we're trying to do at the household level. And yeah, very interesting question. I'll leave it there, or else I'll carry on talking for the next 20 minutes.
Yeah, and it would probably still not be sufficient. Completely agree. It is. It has been a little bit of a I suppose, an you know, enigma, and something that we are now just kind of starting to come to grips with and understand in that kind of bigger, you know, energy system way, rather than necessarily kind of looking at everything separately. And I like what Rafa was saying, you know, just as fuel needs to be integral to sort of food provision, we need to look at those, you know, the kind of access to cooking, you know, as an integral kind of intervention rather than siloed sort of bits and pieces. We can certainly create those co-benefits and co-impacts, I guess, by looking at both institutions, household, productive uses as well. So thank you very much for that. And kind of that brings me to the question of community resilience. And we're lucky to have Long Seng here with us, who looks at resilient community energy systems. And I wanted to pick your brains on that question of, the kind of longevity, the kind of, response to a humanitarian crisis versus the kind of long-term approaches, and how those institutional settings can help build community resilience through energy systems. So over to you, Long Seng.
Thanks, Ilona, and thanks for a really fascinating set of presentations and discussions so far. Thinking about communities who are, already being very proactive in meeting their energy needs and energy access, but they're also increasingly facing shocks and pressures upon them as well. So it's not a static picture, and nowhere is that more front of mind than humanitarian contexts. But thinking more long term, it's also about the preventing, preparing, responding, and recovering from these kinds of shocks and stresses as well. I think institutional cooking offers us an opportunity to really demonstrate how active communities are in meeting these needs, and to really feature their voices in this narrative, I think is going to be really important in co-creating these solutions. And I really liked the co-benefits that have been mentioned so far in the presentations. I think community and institutional cooking can help to enhance community resilience through better nutrition, through cost savings for community services like education, and also ensuring food security as well, which should really include the security of supply of fuels to cook that food. So I really love what's been brought up so far.
Thank you, Longsang. Yeah, certainly. I mean, lots there really to unpack on that kind of question of resilience and where the institutions, social institutions, public institutions really sit in that bigger landscape. And that actually, from the kind of macro perspective, I would like to dive right into the micro level and bring Katerina on board, if you're still with us. If you could tell us a little bit more on that pilot that you conducted in schools. We have a technical question about the power draw associated with the 40-liter EPC and whether that would be an issue for the institutions. And that's from the kind of, power grid and the wiring sort of point of view. And I'll add to it, how do you see that potential transition to modern energy cooking impacting on community resilience, but also on, the transitions to modern fuels across the community where these are being trialed? I'll be happy to repeat that because it's a handful. But Katerina, are you still with us?
Yes.
Please, if you could go ahead. I'm happy to repeat the second part of the question, but the one on the technical aspect of cooking with a 40-liter EPC, if you could first tackle that.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, great. Did you get the question?
Yes, but it was on and off. Is it to share my experience about the institutional about the power draw?
Yes, so I just reposted it in the chat, so it might be easier for you to see the question there. But it is about the power draw associated with cooking with the 40-liter EPC, whether that would create any issue for the grid as well as for the wiring for the equipment.
Okay. It doesn't require different wiring from the normal domestic connections. We just used the normal kitchen switch sockets. So there's no special connections required. And about the power draws, it is indicated in the report, and also the amount of electricity used for each food. So there is no special thing required. It is something possible.
And in terms of sort of the load management for the electricity grid in the area, do you think that there are any challenges that would be associated with, say, having, 5 or 6 of those EPCs when, all of them might potentially be cooking around the same time?
Yes. When let's take, for instance, the whole schools in Dar es Salaam adopt the cooking with electricity using large EPCs, there must be difference on the amount of electricity being drawn in the grid, but it's not a big deal because we have a grid extension. And once you decide to do such big project, there must be a good collaboration with the government and those who are responsible with such issues.
Great. So again, that kind of brings us to the role of stakeholder engagement and partnerships, and really understanding how we can collaborate with the government, with local authorities, with the utilities to sort of facilitate those transitions, that they cannot just happen in a silo and kind of, so to say, live their own lives. They really have to be part of the bigger kind of picture and planning for energy management, for example. I also wanted to ask you from, sort of the technical point of view, the question that Longseng posted in the chat about cooking in institutional settings and opportunities for that to be an anchor load that could potentially enable greater access in the wider area. Do you think that there are opportunities there? Have you seen anything being explored? Are Tatedo thinking about it that way? Then I would also like to get Caroline's view on that. So yeah, over to you, Katerina.
If I get the question well, it is about. It is a question in the chat. If the institutional settings be anchor loads that enable great access in the area.
That's correct.
Yes, I think so. Yes, I think so.
And have Tatedo explored that to date?
Pardon?
Have you at Tatedo explored those opportunities so far, or is that something you're thinking of doing in the future?
Yes, we do. We did. We have explored the opportunities. It is we visited some schools. We see how they cook. So it is a great opportunity and in the area, and it is something that we are still planning to do more on that.
Great. We've just also shared the report that Tatedo have published on the pilot, so anyone interested in learning more about that, you can just follow the link. And now I wanted to hear a little bit more from Caroline, because this is actually something that's happening in Kalobei with the planned work on electric pressure cookers. And while this might be at a household level, we're obviously also collaborating, and SMB are leading some work on electric cooking in institutional settings in Kakuma. So yeah, maybe from sort of, that angle of it being anchor loads, but also other opportunities that are associated with bringing that into a context such as Kakuma, which obviously is quite challenging as a displacement setting.
Yeah, thanks, Ivona, for that question. Indeed, so we are planning on, so as I explained in my presentation, in Colombia Integrated Settlement, one village is currently electrified, connected to a mini grid, a solar or a hybrid solar diesel mini grid, which will also be expanded in the near future. And so again, this provides opportunity to introduce other solutions for cooking, including electric cooking. And so we are hopefully in the coming months going to pilot actually the use of electric pressure cookers to understand what are basically the market conditions needed to introduce this on a wider scale. But first of all, also electric cooking, especially in these settings, it's a rather new field. I think MECS really put it on the agenda, and so there's more and more pilots and more learnings available, but it's quite a new thing. So it needs to be a lot of understanding still created and learning about, what are the user experience, to what extent can an EPC actually meet, cooking needs of households, of eateries, what is the impact on the grid. So one of, for instance, the key questions is to what extent does it indeed promote electricity use, but it can of course also overload a system. And so this is also going to be, one of the things that we're really going to look at, what is actually the impact on these mini grids or other electricity power systems to use EPCs, both in households and in businesses. And we're also looking forward to indeed do this within the institutions, because indeed, the rates of electrical reunifications are fortunately increasing. And so this makes the potential for either induction stove or electric pressure cooking definitely a very interesting technologies to further learn about and explore to understand how you can scale up the use, ideally of course through the market. So it's a very interesting thing, and we're very much looking forward to learning more about this together with our partners, including MECS program. Thanks, Ivona.
Thank you, Caroline. That actually brings me to the question that Simoshi just posted in the chat about the sort of training and maintenance, and the importance of really embedding maintenance operations and maintenance, and that building that capacity from the get-go. So Rafa and then subsequently Mark, from your experience kind of working across the food sector, the energy sector with that kind of clean cooking lens and in place, how do you see that capacity being sort of maintained but also expanded as we sort of move forward with those transitions? Of course, in those contexts where they are possible today, and sort of thinking ahead long term as we transition to cleaner stacks. So maybe Rafa, over to you.
Thanks, Ivona. Actually, I would move a step further. So first of all, completely agree with the comment. It's a disaster across the board, not only with stoves, but with anything that you might think of in the energy sector. It's a technology-based solution, and technology does need some support. It does need actually an ecosystem around it of technicians, electricians, and all sorts of people that are able to provide services. So, the first thing was to put the solar panels over the school, or to put a stove in there, and that's it. The second thing would be, let's train the teachers to repair the solar panels or to repair the stove, and let's do the training. That's not something that really changes the picture that much, because teachers are teachers, and you can't normally train normal people taken from your project or even beneficiaries from your project that are the poorest of the poor on, electromagnetic field. You need people coming out of proper educational backgrounds with their electrician certification and so forth. You do not repair your own washing machine, so don't ask the beneficiaries to repair their stoves or their solar panels. What instead I think is a must that we need to do in the sector is to work with the private sector. So have contracts that do include the warranty, as you know we have in normal lives, and to approach our projects with an ecosystem perspective. So we cannot dump a solution in the vacuum. We do need to think in terms of bringing the capacity with the project to the location. If that's not possible, then I'm afraid that not even bringing the cook stove is possible or should be possible. So in most places, it is more difficult by all means, but that's what we need to do. So yeah, that would be my 2 cents.
Great, thank you, Rafa. Mark, anything to add here? And again, it's a well, so yeah.
No, I mean, thanks for putting me after Rafa. She leaves me very little to add. I couldn't concur with her more. You know, we've seen in this space, as she's hinted at, you know, where we put solar solutions in and, you know, within 12 months they're broken. We don't have access to spare parts. We don't have the right skill set in the situation. So it leaves a really sort of bitter taste in sort of developing, you know, clean, modern solutions because of that example. So I think there's a lot of lessons learned in there, and the language that we're hearing with our partners is certainly shifting. And I really want to sort of stress the e-waste aspect to this. You know, we're not only putting in, you know, cooking solutions and modern cooking solutions. A lot of these, even if we're looking at improved cook stoves, they have some very smart metering. They have some very cool technology in them that has some componentry. So we need to be really aware of the potential waste situation that we're generating. But I just really want to sort of push what Rafa is saying, but we are seeing this shift. We are now seeing some projects coming out of IOM and UNHCR's collaboration with GIZ ESDS program, where, you know, we're looking at procurement. You know, how do we procure these services in a sort of sustainable manner? So it's not just about getting the solution, as Rafa said. It's now looking at, can we get an operation and maintenance contract associated to that, at least for the first 2 or 3 years, that we can then renew at a later date. So we're certainly looking at a long-term solution rather than, I don't want to say quick fix, but it really was about getting solutions into the field as quickly as possible. Now it's all about how do we minimize our impact and actually develop long-term solutions. So it's a really interesting question, and one that we are taking very seriously as we go forward. But thank you.
Thank you both. Yes, that's, I think, you know, just as e-waste is important to think about, so are all the kind of externalities of moving to modern energy cooking, right? And if we miss out on something as critical, then very likely we're going to have to try to figure out those quick fixes, and that's not necessarily always good, kind of, you know, as we go. So of course, yeah, it does require a lot of kind of a lot of consideration, and therefore we really postulate that more research is really needed, not least just on institutional cooking, but more sort of, again, holistically on different contexts, different settings where both institutional and household level access is still kind of, you know, lagging behind when it comes to access to clean cooking. I did want to address the question that Melinda just posted. We still have a few minutes, so we might be sort of starting to wrap up, but I think it's very important to think about the question of gender, disability, and really leaving no one behind. So just as you were saying, Mark, you know, we have to think about the long term. We also have to think about leaving no one behind. So what might that mean for sort of planning and implementation? And really, I would like to open it up to the panel, because you all have different perspectives, you know, from the kind of research point of view to the more kind of hands-on implementation and also the policy work. So maybe if everyone wanted to comment just very quickly, a minute and a half each, and I think we'll be coming to a conclusion. So maybe we start with Long Seng.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I had a few thoughts on this. I think protection issues will be particularly important in some of the contexts that we're working in. Some of these are more formal because of the power imbalances between people in those situations. One thing to consider is also the energy access context of the host community. So actually working in institutional contexts and in displacement settings as well is part of addressing this agenda of not leaving anyone behind, because in the national discussions, perhaps these settings may not be currently included yet. So I think it's very important to change the narrative on that. And of course, intersectional analysis of potential impacts is just as important here as any other kind of intervention.
Thank you, Longseng. Just in the interest of time, I'm just going to move along the panel. So I've got Caroline next.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much. Yeah, I think it's a very important question to raise within any key, cooking interventions. Of course, gender considerations are very key. Actually, beyond what Longseng is saying and also what she addressed, what is also, for instance, for the Kakuma context, very important is to consider the livelihood of the host communities, which fuel actually poses. So currently, the firewood is actually procured by UNHCR, and it's actually provided by the host community. So it's a very important source of livelihood, actually. And so when you're looking to, introducing alternative fuels, or solutions, you also really need to consider, okay, what is that doing for the livelihood of the host communities? And so we are also within our interventions very sensitive on that, not only from, replacing a potential income stream, but also looking into acceptance of a new solution or a fuel. Because usually a host community, it's of course very leading also towards, what is socially and culturally accepted with all the community. So another thing is that, you need to be very aware of, indeed the risk and the local context and complexities that come along introducing any new solution or if you're trying to change the status quo. So I just wanted to highlight that. Thanks.
Thank you, Caroline. And again, with that maybe more implementation based, lens in mind, Rafa, if you wanted to comment on that question of, leaving no one behind, that'd be great.
Definitely, yeah. So as I was mentioning before, we surely look at the subsidies as something that is part of the picture. Reaching the most vulnerable means that some of the costs need to be taken by the government, the international community, and there are plenty of reasons why we should look at that as investment rather than cost. So the environmental impacts, not having them is an investment into the environmental capital of a country. Health reasons as well is not having to cure people afterwards. The human capital of a country is a super important aspect to invest on. So that's the way I would look at the subsidy subject as an investment to avoid further costs down the line.
Great. And Mark, from your perspective, kind of displacement settings and also maybe a little bit more on the policy side, where do you see that agenda of leaving no one behind sitting, both for, institutional cooking as we started to explore it more, and also your experience from the kind of broader context of clean cooking?
Great, thanks, Yvonne. Leave the difficult questions to the end. I think it's always a challenge around the policy side looking at displacement settings because, in many contexts, the displaced community are not wanted. So it's really a challenge to develop policies with local and national governments to make the displaced communities, included in the national policy. And that's a lot of work that we're trying to do. How do we support hosting governments, develop policies that are inclusive, but also working with our development and also peace partners? how can we connect the sort of humanitarian work with other activities? Can we extend, for instance, development activities around, developing clean cooking and modern cooking solutions to actually be inclusive of the displacement settings themselves? And then really the sort of displacement communities themselves, just being aware we are generally, not always, talking about the poorest of the poor. There is no silver bullet there, as we mentioned, in terms of cooking. But, there are different delivery mechanisms, as Rafa has hinted at. How, for instance, could we, provide LPG at different levels? There is various solutions around, making it affordable to different sides of the populations, using subsidies, as Rafa is saying, using cash, using voucher systems. How does pay-as-you-go work against, just purchasing cylinders outright? So these are the things we need to look at as actually blending solutions, not just about blending finance, but also blending opportunities within the delivery mechanisms that are out there.
Great, thank you all for sharing that. And I guess within all that, we should not forget that there are different groups with different needs, and therefore that's really important to consider as well. And hopefully we'll be seeing more and more of that in the research that's sort of ongoing and that's coming out, and all the work that all of you are doing. So thank you so much for answering so patiently all the questions. Thank you for being here with us today. We're a minute past our time, so I'm going to wrap up here. Big thank you to the panelists, to the presenters, and also to the participants. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We have shared some links to resources in the chat, and there have been very strong open invitations to reach out to all different sort of partners on this call for any collaboration. So please do, you'll be able to find this recording online, so you can always go back and refer to it. That'll be it from our end on behalf of MECS, the Clean Cooking Alliance, and the Week of Clean Cooking that's happening this week. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you for the discussion. It was really good.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.